Yes, it's that moment that every boy who ever's dreamed of building his own voiceover studio dreams of. And that is, it's door day. I get to build my own door. Actually, I built the door in my current voiceover booth in the same way, which is to say I've used plywood, doubled up 3/4 inch plywood, so I have 1.5 inch solid plywood door, and I've made my own jamb. This collection of lumber here in my hallway is a sheet of plywood, 4x8, good one side. The bad side is showing. The other side is quite nice, and that'll be the side that shows, to me anyway, inside the room. I've also purchased 3 2x6s, which I will dress down. I'll cut them down to 5 inches in width, and then I'm going to set up my dado blade once again in my table saw, and I will use that to cut the rabbet, which is the rebated piece of that wood, which will form the backstop for the door jamb. Once I get my rabbet cut for the door, then I'm going to pass that stock over top a thin kerf saw blade, and into that slot is going to fit this exterior weather stripping, which is meant for exterior doors, and it's quite handy. It has a very grippy little bit. It's a technical term. I'm pretty sure they don't call it grippy bits, but I don't know what to call it. But that's what will fit and will press into that slot that I'm going to cut. And then, of course, when the door closes, it closes against this rubber, and that's what's going to give me a nice tight compression seal. The other thing that I'm doing, as I've done in my voiceover booth that I currently have, is I've built a sill on the bottom as well, a threshold on the bottom, just to give it a nice tight seal all around. There'll be no sound escaping from underneath the door, where you would normally leave a little bit of a gap so the door can swing. So it'll be surrounded on all sides by weather stripping, and with a nice tight seal. And then once I get the door built, then I'm pretty much done the room. Flooring, of course, I have to do, but yeah, it's a matter of days, I think. This room is a lot greener than I thought it would be. I didn't mean it to be a green room, but I guess, well, that's what it is. It's the green room, and I'm the only occupant, really. I'm ready to start putting my door together, so I've got my jambs, top and bottom sides, all cut and ready to go. I just have to install them, so I'm going to start at the top. On my top jamb, and I'm going to attach that to the side jambs through the top with screws, and then set that piece into place, because I can leave some room at the bottom, and then I'll put my bottom jamb in at the last. So that will give me the ability to stand the frame up into the open doorway. And that way I'll also have a bit more strength in my top to my side jamb. I don't have a strong top sill. I kind of overlooked that when I was so busily putting the room back together. I do have material in there sort of cribbed in, and it's going to be strong enough structurally, it'll be fine. It's just not kind of proper. But you know, a little dirt hides a lot of sin, as they say. You won't see it. So before I pound this piece in here, I just wanted to round over this edge a little bit. This will be on the inside of the room. You can see I've got roughly a 1/2 inch flooring to there. I've got a 1/4 inch cork, so I'm allowing for that. So I've just started to round over this edge, and I'm using a block plane and a bit of sandpaper, just to take the edge off, only to the point where it's exposed. The door will still sit here in its 1.5 inches. I've had to cut a little rabbet in there, because here you can see the subfloor is not quite as high as the original subfloor. There's a bit of a lip that runs right here, so at the back here. So I've just notched this out a little bit so that when it slides in, it'll sit over top of this ridge. Let's give it a whirl. And then once I do that, of course, I just have to stuff my weather stripping in, and then I can do a careful measurement, and then I can cut my plywood down to size, and I can build my door. And building the door was fairly straightforward, and meant cutting up the plywood in exactly the right dimensions, and doing so safely. It was nice to have Mika and Scout to keep me company. They're not much good with power tools, or really any kind of tools, but they're pleasant company nonetheless. Installing the weather stripping was easy enough, and then it was on to the hinges for the door and jamb. There are easier ways to do this sort of thing, using fixed templates and routers and all that, but I still chip away old school, mostly because I don't have templates, and free-handing a router scares me, quite frankly. In fact, the router is the one tool that gives me pause, and I'll avoid it wherever I can. I think that's wise. The most important thing is getting the door in place with hinges fully attached and marking the jamb very clearly with a sharp edge like a chisel for the hinge positioning. Then it's chip, chip, chip away with the chisel to get a nice even mortise. And if ever you've wrestled a greased pig, you'll know what manhandling a large, very heavy door is like, trying to mate the three hinges, and without even the prospect of a prize at the end of it. It would have been easier to have a second set of hands here, but then hey, you'd have to share the prize, wouldn't you? And what if it was really good? As you can see, I've started to lay my floor, but I'm at that point where I need to ensure that it's squared to the end wall and to the side and to the corner, essentially. Because as its mass increases, as it gets bigger, I'm not going to be able to move it. When I lay a board up on the one end and I notice on the back end that a seam is popped, that's because the whole thing tends to wobble a wee bit. Enough to pop a seam, that is, because it's a floating floor and it tends to move. So either this end has to come out or this end here has to come in a little bit perhaps, right? But anyway, I got to puzzle this one out because it's making me nuts. That's about all I'm going to do today, and that's most of the room. That's an awful lot. I've been up and down off that deck more times than a punch-drunk, really, really lousy amateur boxer working the circuit. And I'm feeling it. I'll feel it tomorrow, that's for sure. But anyway, that's good. I've got really good progress. Not far to go. I can get it done tomorrow. What I am enjoying is the view of this room. And it looks great, and I'm just as pleased as punch, and I'm just taking a quick break to appreciate it before I get on to the next step, which is to trim and to case these windows. I have to tie in my electrics. I have to get my plug-ins wired in. Then I can start working on my acoustic treatment, and then I'm ready to record. If you've been to my website, you might have noticed there's a picture of me shamelessly displayed. I'm standing beside a Supermarine Spitfire. In my view, the greatest fighter plane ever built. A year and a half ago, I went to England, to Biggin Hill, south of London, and I flew in that aircraft. It was a combat veteran Spitfire that had been converted to a trainer. And it was the fulfillment of a boyhood dream. It was the single greatest experience of my life. The point of this is that I'm reminded of what a friend of mine told me about his father at the end of the Second World War. He was ground crew in the RAF, and they were over on the mainland. And as the front was shrinking, they sensed that the war was over. It was coming to a very swift end because they weren't putting any fuel into the Spitfires, very, very little, because the Spitfires weren't flying very far. They didn't have to. The front was shrinking. Every day it got a little bit closer, and every day they put less and less fuel into the airplane. And it reminds me of this. For me, that is the floor. It was my door, the windows certainly, but I have compared this to an adventure, certainly to an odyssey. I hadn't compared it or thought about it as a war, but in some ways it was. It was a war between this room and myself, my patience, my energy level. But nevertheless, I'm getting close, and for me, this is my Spitfire moment. You wouldn't know what to look at me, but I'm really very excited. I'm just too tired. I'm not the kind of guy to jump and dance and do cartwheels, mostly because I can't, but I am pretty excited. It's that glow of satisfaction. I'm just taking a moment to kind of appreciate what this room has become based on where it was when I started. So anyway, just give me a moment, will you? I'm staying. I'm staying, as Walter said, enjoying the coffee, enjoying the view. Next time out on building a home voiceover studio, it's finishing up all the trims, taking care of electrical and connection details, and starting the big move from my little old booth in the basement. Thank you, little booth. You've been quite wonderful. That's next time on Building a Home Voiceover Studio.